Joshua Stanton is the founding co-editor of the Journal of Interreligious Dialogue at Auburn Theological Seminary and co-director of Religious Freedom USA, an organization that works to ensure that the freedom of religion is protected for citizens. He is also the Schusterman Rabbinical Fellow at the Hebrew Union College, a Jewish institute of religion. He was recently chosen as a Religious Leadership Fellow at the Council of Parliament of the World's Religions. He has been the recipient of numerous leadership awards, including the Bridge Builders Leadership Award from the Interfaith Youth Corps, Herbert H. Lichterman Outstanding Programming Award, the Volunteer Hero Award of the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, and the Hyman P. Moldover Scholarship for Jewish Communal Service. He was also named one of the best Jewish voices on Twitter by Huffington Post Religion. I would now like to invite Joshua Stanton to address the audience.
Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'd like to start out today with a story that is found in the Talmud, a book of Jewish law. And it's about a gentleman by the name of Choni HaMa'agal, someone that we might consider a mystic in these days. Now this guy Choni was walking along, and he ran into an elderly gentleman who was planting a tree. Not just any tree, but a carob tree, which takes 40 years to come into bloom and to really grow to its full height. And Choni said to the elderly gentleman, "What is this you're doing? You're never going to see this tree come into blossom. You're going to pass away before it does." And the gentleman turned to Choni and said, "There were carob trees here before I got here. And I want to make sure that my children also have carob trees." What he was talking about was the issue of legacy, that which will live on after us, that which will succeed us, that which will carry on even without us. And when I think of today's event, I think we're all gathered here today to talk about a question of legacy, to talk about social justice and those actions that will matter to not only us, but future generations after us. But what is so particularly remarkable about speaking on a college campus is that many of the young people here who are planting trees of social justice as we speak may yet live to see them come to fruition. We do not need to wait to plant those trees of social justice. We do not need to wait to begin to collaborate with one another. We do not need to wait in order to invest in our common future and invest in the common good. And that's why I am so honored to be your guest today, to talk about what is possible between our religious traditions. While we may not agree on every theological matter, there is so much we can do to plant that tree together. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about my background as a Jewish American, because I think that one of the remarkable commonalities between the Jewish community and the Muslim community in the United States comes in the stories of our immigration, comes in our stories as people who are new to America, who came here for a better future and were able to plant those trees, that it could really be so. And on my mother's side of the family, it was actually my great-grandparents who came to New York. But it was my grandparents who began to realize for themselves the American dream, and they did so through social justice. My grandfather, Edmund Zaslow, was a principal in a public school in New York City. He was somebody who cared so deeply about the community and about each and every one of his students. And he was a principal during a really remarkable period of transition for New York, when desegregation was taking place, so that black students and white students, students of all backgrounds, could go to school together. And for him, this was the most important issue he could possibly think of. But it hit him in the gut in a different way. because he saw that there were schools in the South that were still not desegregated, that still had a white school and a black school, that still did not look upon Jewish brothers and sisters as full members of the community. There was a segregation of mind, a segregation of spirit that he could not live with. Now, my grandfather was an incredible human being, but there are so many of us here that carry within us that same spirit, that same desire to pursue justice wherever we go. And what my grandfather did is something that I'd like to think many of us would have the courage to do. Because he went down into the South, and he marched, and he walked, and he fought for racial equality. Because he saw in his own school what the potential for that justice, that equality, that parity between people could actually do. And he wanted to make sure that that dream was realized no matter where in the country he set foot. Now, thinking of my grandfather, he was no Superman. He was no prophet. He was a human being imbued with that divine spirit to pursue social justice wherever he went. And I think that is the lesson for all of us today. That social justice, that tree of social justice, can be planted wherever any of us are. And when we see a profound need for us to address an issue of injustice, whether racial, whether related to religious inequalities, or the singling out of a given religious community. And just 2 years ago, I was confronted with such a moment, such an incident, such a period of time in which I was called to answer for myself as a Jewish person and pursue social justice. Many of you may remember the quote-unquote controversy surrounding the Park 51 Community Center. Never have I heard of a community center, a place where people gather for swimming and theater, cause such a disturbance. And I was friends with Imam Faisal, I was friends with Daisy Khan, and everyone around me was sitting quietly as their names were being smeared in the national media, as they were being, in my mind, practically blasphemed in terms of what people were saying about them. And there was a key moment of question. What would I do? What must I do as a member of the Jewish community when a Muslim brother and sister are being so discredited, so singled out? And it seemed clear to me that I could not stand idly, that I could not sit and wait, that I could not just read the newspaper day after day as attacks came after my dear friends. Now, there's a saying in the Talmud that when color is drawn to a person's face through embarrassment, it's as though they've been physically struck. And it felt like there was a true assault of words going on against my friends. And it was because of that, it was because of my religious tradition that I realized I must act, I must stand up, I must do something in support of the Park 51 Community Center. And so in collaboration with, of all people, a dear friend who is a born-again Christian, we decided to organize a coalition of organizations, of institutions, in support of the Park 51 Community Center. Now that coalition... Because when one religious community is singled out, none of our communities are safe. Because when one group is marginalized, all of us may be subject to marginalization. Because when someone goes in the public media to discredit an entire group of people, all of us may be subject to that type of defamation. And it seems clear that here in the United States, our religious communities have the potential to do something as never before in collaborating for the common good. And that collaboration must start with the protection of one another, the protection of one another in the media, the protection of one another in the streets, the protection of each other's religious institutions, so that when my synagogue is up the street from a mosque and down the street from a church, we may truly be neighbors. That's what Religious Freedom USA came together to do. Now, there were many events that we held in support of Park 51. So many events, so many articles, so many interviews in the media in 12 languages that we made sure took place in support of the Park 51 Community Center. But by far, the most touching moment that I had was walking down the half mile from my rabbinical school with 75 future and current rabbis, Jewish leaders of both genders, Jewish leaders of multiple denominations, to go and rally in support of the center. It was in that moment, in that instance, when the 75 of us were there with signs, quoting our sacred Torah, quoting books of Jewish law about why we needed to be involved, that I saw a glimpse of the future of social justice in this country across religious traditions, across religious communities, truly standing there with each other in our time of need, truly being neighbors to each other. Because ultimately, that is what our religious traditions are about. There's a very famous scholar of Jewish law discussing a key point about what is more important in our tradition: praying at exactly the right time or engaging in social justice. And in a crucial and fundamental debate within our tradition, what wins out is the cry for social justice. When you heed a mitzvah, a commandment related to social justice, you may even postpone prayer, our most sacred of internal and communal rituals. Anything, everything in the pursuit of justice. That's what our tradition commands. And I will assure you that based on the incredible Muslim leaders that I know, social justice is core of Islam as well. Now, we are here on a very important day, on Prophet Mohammad Day. And I will tell you up front that my knowledge is in Jewish texts, not Islamic texts. But in drawing from one of our great scholars, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, I have a sense of what it might mean when I read the Quran and appreciate the Quran for how I read it. Abraham Joshua Heschel suggests that prophecy is what he calls divine pathos, that overwhelming empathy that a person can have, such profound empathy that they can even connect to and relate to the divine and transcribe a sacred and divine message. And the parts of the Quran that I find most beautiful as a Jewish person relate to the common ancestry, relate to the idea that we are both Abrahamic traditions. And though we may have slight differences, though important differences, about how we understand Abraham, how we understand the prophetic traditions, we have that common root, and that common past gives birth to that common future. That common past enables us to have a common future. And most importantly, I would suggest, right here and right now, a common future in the United States. So we are both from traditions that engage with prophets who had such empathy, such overwhelming empathy for the people on the streets, the people with needs, the people who were poor and impoverished. Such empathy, such an ability to connect with them, that through that empathy, in my view, as a Jewish scholar, they were able to connect to the divine. And we are not prophets here. We are ordinary people. But it is through that empathy, through that sacred understanding of people other than ourselves, that we may also heed the prophetic message conveyed in our respective traditions. That we may work and aspire, as us as ordinary human beings only can hope to fulfill the visions conveyed in our sacred texts. And so it's my hope that the Muslim and the Jewish community can empathize with each other, can relate to each other, can engage with each other with that sacred notion of empathy, that sacred notion of caring, that divine pathos that transcends difference and enables us to acknowledge that those differences persist, but that there is a sacred message beyond those differences that it is our obligation to heed and understand and to connect to in our collaborative efforts together. And it is in those collaborative efforts that I personally feel and see the divine spark in so many of my fellow human beings. It is in that collaboration that we can realize the messages preached within our respective traditions. It is in those moments of collaboration when 75 of our country's future Jewish leaders gather in front of a Muslim community center to show their support for the Muslim community and show their common vision for an American future, that we realize those prophetic messages. And I said with confidence to my Jewish colleagues and friends that day, I said with confidence that in our time of need, we too would be able to count on the Muslim community. We too know that if our community centers are protested because of our religious beliefs, you would be there for us in pursuit of justice, in pursuit of righteousness, in pursuit of your prophetic vision. And it is in that mutuality, that mutual concern, that mutual need, and the fulfillment of our prophetic vision that we have access to through sacred text and animated through prayer and gatherings as a community, that we can look together for that common future. So that when your mosques are located next to my synagogue and my friends' synagogues, we're not just going to be neighbors in name. We're going to be neighbors in actuality, out there in the streets, feeding the poor, helping the hungry, clothing the naked, and taking care of the common society in which we all live. And understanding that while we may have walls on the physical buildings of our mosques and synagogues, we also have doors, and big doors, through which there is room for both of us to walk together, hand in hand, in pursuit of that vision. And it is with that hope and aspiration that I feel so blessed to be here with all of you on Prophet Mohammad Day. And I think it says so much about this organization that it would invite me, a future rabbi, to speak at an event about the Prophet Mohammed. I think it says so much about the seeds, about the trees we are planting for social justice. And while it would be a blessing to be with all of you when we saw those trees come to fruition together in the United States in a vision of pluralism, it is planting them together that in my mind is the most sacred act. So blessings of peace to all of you. May we go forward together and plant the sacred seeds of social justice that they may come to fruition in the fertile soil of the United States. Thank you so much.